Hello and welcome to the Kinfolk Chat podcast. My name is Erica, and in this podcast, we're going to talk about genealogy, DNA, culture, and just plain old people. So thanks for tuning in. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Let's get started. I've been taking a class through Masterclass online. And the course is Michael Twitty's Tracing Your Roots Through Food. I've really been enjoying this class because it allows you the chance to look into the history of food, how food defines us as a people, and most importantly, his slogan, which is, "Your food is your flag." I love that. So, I don't want to give away too much information about the class, but I do want to state that he challenged us to document our food journey. So I chose to document it through a podcast. So here we are. His challenge was to look at how we got here and where we're going. So for me, I decided to look at my food history as a child, bring it up to about college age, where I am now, and where I hope to be in the future. Growing up as a child in Miami, Florida, we had unique opportunities to experience different types of foods. If you've been following my YouTube channel for some time, you know that my father's family is from the Bahamas and my mother's family is from Georgia/South Carolina. So therefore, my food palette was pretty varied, yet stayed very cultural as well. Now, starting from my home foods or foods that were prepared in my home, when Mama cooked, that's when I experienced the fried foods like fried chicken, fried pork chops. We also had meatloaf, baked chicken, and other foods that were known in the South and in America. Now, when it came to food preparation, meat was always the staple. So once we knew what meat we were going to have for dinner, it was pretty much accompanied by white rice and some type of mixed vegetable. And of course, we always had our choice of either water or soda. And because my parents shopped at Winn-Dixie, it was typically the Winn-Dixie brand soda, which had different flavors. Or like I mentioned, at the time, they didn't have purified water filters on the refrigerator, so we would drink tap water. And we survived it. But yes, that was the basis of the meals when it came to my mother preparing and cooking meals for the family. Now, when my grandmother, so my mother's mother, when she came to town, we were really excited because she was the one that prepared biscuits. So again, my mother's family was from Georgia, but they had roots in South Carolina. So therefore, that greatly impacted their palates growing up and the way that they cooked traditionally. My grandmother came from a very, very large family. It was 13 children total. So, of course, during that time, the early 1900s, they were raised agriculturally. So they were raised on a farm. My grandmother stated when she was younger that she learned to cook as a very, very young girl. And she cooked, as she said, quote, for some white folks. So therefore, her culinary journey started very early in life out of necessity, out of survival. She had to work to help her mother because her father died when she was a young girl in her teens. So she was the oldest of the family, so she was the one to help her mother out financially. So that experience gave her a head start on cooking. And of course, the tradition throughout the family was that all of the girls learned how to cook. My grandmother, she specialized in biscuits. My grandmother also made cake from scratch. So we really look forward to that when she came to visit from North Florida. Again, she was from Georgia, moved to North Florida to work and raise her family along with her husband. But yes, when she came to South Florida to visit, she brought all of her culinary wisdom and skills with her. And therefore, we as a family benefited from it because we got a chance to have things that we didn't have, traditionally with my mom cooking. As I explained, my mom's kind of sketch of a plate. There was a meat involved, there was a starch involved, and there was a vegetable. And a lot of times my mom would also add cornbread on the side. But again, my grandmother brought the cake from scratch. And she also made her own icing, which was interesting. I used to watch her cook. It was so, so cool. She made her biscuits from scratch. She also had some pretty, I call non-traditional foods that she liked to consume. So my grandmother loved to fish. She was a big, big time fisher. And I used to go on the fish creek with them as well just to watch. I was such a squeamish kid. I did not like to hook the worm because I didn't like the thought of killing a worm. That's a whole nother podcast. But I didn't like to take the fish off the hook, and I didn't like to put the worm on the hook. So I had my dad to do that for me, or my grandmother. And of course, they fished with cane poles. So I would, of course, put the lure down into the water. And when a fish bit, then of course I would alert my grandmother or my father or even one of my brothers. And they would help me to, bring the fish to the shore, or I would do it myself. But again, that was just one of the things I remember growing up as far as my grandmother's culinary experience. So she would fish, come home, clean the fish, and we would have that for dinner. Very fresh. She also would catch turtle, right? So she would catch snapper turtle, and she would come home, and I saw her do this, and I'll never forget as a child. She would come home to our family's home, and she would take a hammer, and she would break the shell of the snapper turtle. But this is gruesome, so I don't know if you want to fast forward if you're squeamish, but this is what they did to survive. This is like the way they prepared foods. So she would take a set of needle-nosed pliers and jam it in there to get the head of the snapper turtle out. Because if a snapper turtle bites you, that's it, right? So she would pull the head out, and then she would chop the head off. And then she would break the shell of the turtle with a hammer. And once, the turtle, of course, was deceased, then she would proceed to clean it out. And she would take the meat of the turtle, and then she would prepare a turtle stew. I thought that it was a very gruesome process. I had to have like plant-based leanings from a child because literally I saw my family eat almost every animal out there. And back to the turtle soup or the turtle stew, she would prepare it. I tried it before. I could not stand it. It was too gamey for me. But for some reason, she loved it. And here's something that I actually learned on the Masterclass, that there is turtle stew prepared in the Congo. And as you all have seen, we have DNA that traces back to the Congo as well. So to me, it's just a traditional food that has been passed down through generations. And of course, after leaving Africa and being here in the US, they kept those palettes, they kept those traditions, they kept those foods that they were used to eating back in Africa. So therefore, the stew was a part of some of the cooking or the culinary lineage that she came from. So as an adult now, I appreciate it. As a child, I was slightly traumatized by the experience, but really, now that I'm doing more research, I see that it is really a part of who she was. And as mentioned earlier, she introduced a lot of these wild foods, I guess you can say, to the family as well, because not only did she prepare turtle stew, she also ate rabbit, fried rabbit. She also ate raccoon, which was prepared with onions and carrots and potato and was baked. That was pretty traumatizing, especially the fact that she left the head on and she put it in the oven after, of course, she skinned it and filleted it, and she also seasoned it up. And when you opened the oven, the eyes were staring at you. So again, more trauma as it relates to food. And honestly, as I reflect on it, maybe that's why I'm not so big on certain meats. I did eat and try a lot of the different meats because, of course, back then there was no being picky over food. It was, multiple kids in the house, multiple family members. So I couldn't just make the choice to not eat certain things. Because if you didn't eat that, you just weren't going to eat. So it wasn't like my parents didn't have the food or the resources, but it was practical. It was practicality, I guess you can say. We prepared food for the family, so the family eats the prepared food. It's not we prepared food for the family, and if you don't want it, you can go to McDonald's. That was not a choice. So again, if they prepared the turtle stew, and honestly, my parents weren't like really hard pressed over making me eat things I didn't want. But if I didn't want the turtle stew, there was also an alternative meat. So we always kept hot dogs, bologna in the refrigerator. So I could always make a different sandwich, but I'm not given the option to go out to purchase food that's not already in the home. So that wasn't the option. So again, we tried different types of foods. I allowed myself to at least try it once. Tried turtle once. Tried raccoon once. Tried rabbit once. Tried gator once. I tried a lot of different foods, but I guess we'll kind of talk about that as we talk about where I was in my college years. So I'm kind of getting off track. Let me back up. So we established my mother's cooking and her palette, her plate, her flag, right? We established my grandmother's plate and flag. And now we look at my father and his culinary experience. Now, my father, having Bahamian roots, he had a different culinary palette. A lot of his foods surrounded stewing and also seafood. So, for example, my father had a great recipe for creating crab and rice. So he would use the crabs that were native to South Florida, but he would prepare a crab and rice dish where he didn't take the crab meat out of the crab. He would like chop the crab up into pieces and also and add it to the rice. So as you ate this dish, you were able to eat the rice and all of the fixings that go along with it. And you had to pretty much crack your own crab. But it was an experience. It was very textured, right? So you have your rice, you have your veggies included. And then once you're done eating around that part, then you have the work of cracking open the crab to get the meat. So the meat was seasoned well with the rice and the other vegetables. So to me, that was a nice experience, something that taught me actually how to eat crab. So if I want to learn how to eat crab, I had to, of course, work through this meal. So I don't know if it was more of an introduction to crab, but from what I remember, I have always eaten crab. Like my father used to buy crabs live or alive, sorry, live crabs, and bring them home, put them in a hot pot, put that top over the pot, and of course they'd be struggling to survive. And then, of course, after they were no longer living, he would put beer in there. He would put all of the seasonings in there, and we would have fresh crab for dinner. So that was really interesting. So crab and rice was a big meal that he prepared. He also made conch and rice. So if you know, Bahamians love conch. So he would make, my uncles made the joke and call it skunky rice. That's what they called it. But it was just conch and rice. Same thing. The rice was the base. You had your vegetables added to it, your seasoning, and then the conch. So he pretty much with this dish made the conch. He cooked the conch, so it wasn't very tender, but it wasn't very firm either. It was edible. So that was an interesting experience as well. So conch and rice, shrimp and rice, his hit dishes. He also made a mahi mahi stew on Saturday morning. So that was really, really interesting. So he would cook early in the mornings on Saturdays because, of course, both my parents worked. So early Saturday morning, he would get up, go to the fish market, and he would purchase mahi mahi. And he would make this really amazing mahi mahi stew that had onions and carrots in it. And then, of course, it had the mahi mahi fish in there. And it had it was like a soup slash stew, which was really, really good. I look forward to that. So he would switch it up. So one Saturday morning, the mahi mahi soup stew dish. And then the next Saturday morning, he would do what they call souse. So he would make a pork souse that was also like a stewish, soupish type dish where it had a liquid base. It would be pig ears, pig tail. I know it was a lot of cartilage in it. It was really good. I actually enjoyed that. It gave it a nice texture because I'm into like crunchy foods or foods that have a kind of strong texture to it. I like soups, but if the soup is prepared, it has to have some hearth in it. I guess something hearty in it for me to enjoy it as well. But yes, he made the sauce as well on Saturday mornings. And sometimes he would make rice with it. But whatever the case was, it was a big pot of the sauce. And all day you could just go in and just eat what you want throughout the day. So that was another nice memory that I have of my father's culinary experience. My dad also made a conch salad. So his brothers also were really good at making it. Well, I will say definitely one of his brothers was big on making conch salad. So the conch salad was basically, again, a liquid base. You had your vegetables included. I remember onions and peppers, like bell peppers, I believe. And it had like a red base, so a tomato base. He also tenderized and added the conch to the conch salad, and the conch was actually consumed raw. So it was like a what they call now, or what is traditionally known as a ceviche. So basically, the meat is quote cooked with the acid of what's put, the acid from the liquids, I should say. So we used to eat that as well. You can consume it cold, somewhat room temperature, but it definitely was not a hot meal. So that is definitely one that Bahamians consume. You can find conch in Miami as well. I've had it both cracked conch style and the conch salad style. My father also made conch fried, so he would do fried conch. So he was able to use conch in a variety of ways in his cooking. And like I mentioned, a lot of his cooking surrounded seafood. Now, when it came to our traditional memories of more American Southern style food, he prepared ribs with my family, but he also would do something really special. When I was young, he would go by this restaurant in Miami. I can just say it. It was called People's Restaurant. Uh, I don't know. I think they're still open or they had a newer location, but whatever the case was, back then they were more of a hole in the wall. So People's Barbecue, they used to make the short ribs. They used to make barbecue chicken, all kinds of foods. But he would go there and grab us sandwiches in the evening. And honestly, I believe that was our father-daughter time because he would grab a sandwich for himself. He would grab a sandwich for me. And we would literally sit at the table and talk and spend that time at least about 30 minutes just talking about life. And now that I look back at it, I noticed that that probably was a strategy that he used to connect with his children, especially me because I'm the youngest. And I guess that was his way of just sharing life over food, which I cherish to this day. It was such a great moment. So either we were having crabs on a Friday night, or we would have People's Barbecue on a Friday night, or some Fridays they would just order pizza. So that pretty much sums up my father's highlights as they relate to his plate, his cultural palate, and his food and his culinary experience. Here's another one I want to share. In our family, there is a tradition where my father and his siblings would, in their individual homes, of course, make lima beans on Wednesday nights. And the story is that his stepfather, who helped raise him, and of course the father of his siblings, they all ate lima beans on Wednesday night growing up as children. So his stepfather traditionally made lima beans with a big piece of ham hock, and white rice. And that was the meal every Wednesday without fail. So I knew as I was growing up as a young person, on Wednesday nights, we are going to have lima beans. So when I was able to fend for myself, as you could say, my parents, of course, took care of me, gave me money. But when I was able to purchase my own food around like 15, 16, then, of course, the choice of eating what I wanted was more prominent because I had transportation then. So I was able to drive either one of my parents' cars or whatever to go get the food I wanted if I didn't want lima beans. But to be honest, I ate the lima beans because, again, that was part of tradition and they taste good. I didn't mind it at all. Sometimes I was, kind of get burned out on it, but for the most part, I would eat the lima beans. So that's our family joke that we know if you're related to this family intimately, if you had lima beans on the menu on Wednesday nights. My father's mother passed away when I was pretty young, but I do remember her very vividly because she lived with us for a little while when I was a child. So she probably passed away when I was 8 or 9, somewhere in that range. But I do remember her. Now, honestly, I can't remember any of her foods because by the time I was born, she was very sickly, so she really wasn't cooking. But I'd imagine what my father cooked was a reflection of things that she taught him to cook, given their Bahamian culture. So I really can't elaborate on my great or I'm sorry, on my grandmother, my father's mother's cooking style. Neither can I reflect on her husband's cooking style because he passed away before I was born. So that takes care of that. Now, moving on to college, someone asked me a really interesting question recently. I do not eat pork and I don't eat beef, and I haven't for almost 20 years. So I'm giving up my age at this point. But I haven't for about 20 years. When I was in college, I used to eat everything. I used to fry my pork chops like mama taught me to do, right? That is a part of my palate. But college was a time where I moved away and I had to prepare my own foods. Now, fast food the was on the menu pretty much most of the week. And because I went to school in North Florida, which was in the same city as my grandmother, I would stop by my grandmother's house throughout the week as well, and she would prepare food. Now, she knew my favorite at the time was smothered beef, like a beef, no, I'm sorry, cubed steak. I would have cubed steak with rice and vegetables. That's something that she made. So, college time, when I first got up to college, or went up to college, I was eating everything, all meats. Then the turning point came when I had college roommates in the apartment complex I was living in, and one of my roommates was vegetarian. So I was, of course, bringing my traditions to the situation, frying my pork chops, making fried steak, cube steaks, bacon chicken, all kind of things. Baking chicken. I said bacon. Baking chicken. And she did not like the smell of pork and beef, which was interesting. But she said, when you make these, dishes, I can smell them in my room because we had a common area. And she said, is there a way that you can prepare them when I'm not at home? Well, our schedules didn't allow for that because we were both college students. We were both out. And I was not at home during the day to cook dinner. So I ended up just not cooking pork and not preparing beef. Most of the times I would just stick to baking chicken or something that wasn't fried, or, a smell didn't carry out throughout the house or the apartment. So with that, it caused me to refrain from eating certain meats for a number of years. So during the time that we were roommates, which was like 2.5 years, I stopped pretty much eating those meats. I would eat beef for sure at my grandmother's house, but I didn't prepare it on my own. So in due time, I kind of weaned myself off of beef naturally just because of circumstances. And then the pork kind of went with that in due time. So I was kind of limited to fish and, or I should say seafood and chicken. And then from there, of course, as I grew up and had my own home and my own family for a brief time, of course, I was making more traditional American foods like spaghettis and soups and, just a little less culturally my food from home, but something that I had to adjust to when I had, of course, another person in the home. And he had a different palate and a different experience when it came to food. So I had to make that adjustment as well. Fast forward to now, a full grown adult. I'm exploring more plant-based meals, plant-based eating, of course, coming from where I was born and raised, the two cultures that we put together to make my culture and my palate. And then from there, merging with another person who had a different culture and palate. And then now redefining my own food, culture, and palate as a plant-based eater. Of course, now I don't eat chicken or beef or pork anymore. I'm more, I allow myself to eat seafood from time to time, but for the most part, I am a plant-based eater. What does that mean for my future? Of course, I would love to be vegetarian one day completely, so no seafood at all, or vegan. Okay. But I feel like the vegan thing I might moonlight with, but definitely more vegetarian than anything. Just to speak on my experience now, I'm working with a nutritionist who is African American. She is helping me to get the right vitamins that I need, supplements in my diet, and she's pretty much put together a dietary plan that will help me to meet my weight goals, my health goals, and to live a healthy, happy life through food. So that's pretty much my story as it relates to food, culture, and where I've come from. Now, this podcast is already well over 30 minutes. I can continue to share experiences, but I just kind of brushed over the surface and gave you an overview of my history and background as it relates to food and how my family and culture impacted the way that I ate growing up. So, I would like to thank you all so much for listening to this podcast. Please make sure to share this podcast. And if you have any culinary experiences that you want to share with me, make sure to leave them in the comment section below. I'll definitely follow up with more culinary content in the future. So please make sure to subscribe to this channel so that you can be here when I drop more content. Yeah. So once again, this is Erica from Kinfolk Chat with Swarthy Daisy. I appreciate your support, and I'll definitely see you in the next video and podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Bye.